We're going to get a summary of a big time of human time, the old story, the story of the world before the flood here in Genesis chapter 5, and I'll read the first 8 verses of chapter 6 as well. Listen to the word of the Lord. This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man, which in Hebrew is Adam. So he called them Adam, which means man. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. And after he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. And after he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. And after he became the father of Mahalalel, Kenan lived 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. And after he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. And after he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. And after he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah, and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. When men began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know if any of you are particularly interested in genealogy, if that is one of the hobbies or interests that you have, time that you spend trying to figure out where you come from and what the family line is like and how it was made up. That is something my dad has been interested in on and off again for a whole lot of my life, and he has worked awfully hard on it, which is great. But it brings us to one of the problems of reading this passage of Scripture. My dad knows pretty well inside and out all the people that he's researched, going back pretty far in some areas and not very far in others. And he knows it like the back of his hand. So some of the rest of us haven't spent very much time and energy learning it, which is going to be a problem someday. Because my dad knows a lot of our line, and I'm not sure any of my siblings can trace them back very far. Why is that a problem with what we're reading here? Because you don't want me to recount the history of my family to you today. You would not find it very interesting, unless I had some interesting stories along the way. But if you're working in genealogy, you're working from court records and wedding certificates and birth and death certificates, and you don't always get the juicy stories once you get back very far. You don't know most of the people whose names I read there. Their lives summed up in this refrain: so-and-so lived this many years, had a son, named him this, lived this many more years, had other sons and daughters, and then after this many years, he died. Over and over again. That's exactly the form, with one major exception. And you don't know a lot of them. We don't know anything about Kenan or Mahalalel or Jared. Jared, really, we ought to know something about. I mean, the man lived 962 years. That's a close second to Methuselah. But no, we know Methuselah and not Jared. You wouldn't be interested in my family line so much. But I could actually bore you for a few minutes, at least with the Smith line, because we can't go very far back in the Smiths. Now, you might think that's not unusual because there are so many Smiths. How could you possibly know? There are a lot of us. That's true. There are a lot of Smiths. But the reason that we can't go very far back in the Smith line has nothing to do with how many there are exactly. The real problem is we can go from Arkansas, working our way back, and we get back to Tennessee, and unfortunately, the very records we need to figure out who Andrew Smith's dad was were burned in the Civil War when they burned courthouses in Tennessee. And again, now you see the problem. There are a whole lot of Smiths who were in Tennessee in the 1860s and 1850s and 40s, and so we don't know who Andrew's dad was. So we can go back to Cunningham, we can go back to Andrew, and then after that, that's not very far. 1860s, 70s is not really very far back, and then it ends because we can't get that. My dad got so interested in this that my bookshelves at home in my old bedroom no longer have mostly my books. And part of that's because I take a couple about every time I go home, and don't talk to Wendy about that. I just take a couple more books home. That are my books. She doesn't believe that books do indeed decorate a room, but I work on that principle pretty much. But my dad's filled them up quickly. As soon as I take them, more fill their places, and they're as dry as dust books. Courthouse records of this county in Tennessee and this year, from this year to that year, and court records from this courthouse in Virginia from this year to that year. But that's how he did his work before so much was online. And again, he made some real progress with some lines. In fact, he was able to take the Broyles line, a German line, back through Virginia and back overseas, and was able to discover that what we think is the first Lutheran pastor in this country, back in the 1600s, was brought to pastor my family's church in Virginia. 1600s, brought from Prussia. First Lutheran pastor, we're pretty sure. I don't know whether this should trouble me or not. As far as we can tell, there wasn't another pastor in our line until me. Now, I don't know what that means. And I don't know whether it means what it means for me. Are there a bunch of rascals and rapscallions in my past? Or whether people just didn't want to be a pastor? Whether there were hundreds of years of wise people who chose another line of work? I'm not sure why it is. And actually, now that you can do so much on computer, my little brother is more interested because he's very tech savvy. I don't trust all the results that he comes up with, though. It turns out one of the early pastors of Bruton Parish Church in Colonial Williamsburg, one of my favorite places in the world, that appears to be one of our ancestors in a different line. Here's one reason I don't trust the computer, and don't trust much genealogy. And, on a side note, the reason I really don't trust anybody who is talking about being reincarnated, how they have this firm, strong sense that they have once been reincarnated. First of all, it's not biblical. That's one thing. But here's the problem. They never say, I'm pretty sure that several hundred years ago, I was a peasant toiling for my existence, oppressed by the aristocracy and by kings and queens and things, and we had a terrible life. You don't hear that. People who are trying to express a belief in reincarnation almost always once were somebody famous. What are the odds? There aren't that many famous people. Most of us, for most of human history, have been the grunts. We've done the hard work, and a very few people have been famous, noteworthy, wealthy. But the people who say, I'm pretty sure once upon a time I was, never are the vast majority of people. Maybe it is that the famous people hold on to that memory just long enough that they can pass it on to the next person they're reincarnated into. I'm being sarcastic because I don't believe in it at all, but that strikes me as strange. Strikes me as strange that people can go back and, in our family line, this cracks me up. We're related to George Washington. Are you really? Or are you related to George Washington's family or to his wife Martha? Because George didn't have any children. Have to kind of work your way around to be related to George Washington. Or whatever other famous person you want to be related to. There are famous people in this story, and there are completely people lost to our memory. We don't know anything about them. That's good news for you and me, I think. The way that Paul told the church at Corinth, not many of you are famous before coming to faith in Christ. Not many of you are wise. Not many of you are noteworthy in the ways of the world. And when you read these genealogies in Genesis 5, Genesis 11, or in Matthew or in Luke, there are all these names and all these people. And some of them you don't know anything about. And that's great, because some of us, nobody's going to know anything about in 200 years or more. Thousands of years, for heaven's sakes. Some people may be noteworthy. Some people may be famous. Some people may be famous for a time. But we can almost always find ourselves in the genealogies. I titled this The Good, the Bad, and I know you're going to think the ugly. And the ugly's in here, but the good and the bad, there's not a lot of good. There's a whole lot bad. And by the end, we see that judgment is coming. And it comes really in these lives that are so simply recounted. So if I were reading this and it were a movie, if we were going through this history in a movie, there would be music building that's slightly foreboding at the beginning and then gets darker and darker all along the way. Because remember what's happening here. We're moving hundreds and hundreds of years forward into human history, but the stain, the disease, the taint of sin, this deadly, dangerous thing that has come into the world with Adam and Eve is not diluting out the more people there are. It's growing stronger and stronger the farther away we get from the thing that tipped us over. When Adam and Eve, seemingly not harmlessly, but really should they have gotten into so much trouble just for eating a piece of fruit? When God specifically told them not to, we see that that one sin has colored and changed everything in the world, and it's building. You don't know it because of the way that this refrain goes on and on about these people, but it's there. Let me give you a tip where to listen for it. And then he died. What did the serpent say to Adam and Eve? Did God really say that you would die if you ate that fruit? You know that's not really what's going to happen. God just told you that because he didn't want you to have the fruit. Did God really say? And God said, the day you eat of it, you will surely die. We didn't die that instant, which is actually a sign of grace, by the way. In fact, he lived 930 years, but then he died. And his son Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. And Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. The curse of sin, the outworkings of sin in this world are building and building and building, and now they're extending to every single person. Adam and Eve had the potential not to die. Now they will surely die. So that they might live, I think, but they will surely die. And you see that being worked out. Also, Noah's father refers to the curse in the garden. And so we'll see that. Judgment is coming. It is already happening. People are dying. They weren't made to die. They were made to live. Now, you're going to ask me about the years, how many years they're living. And I would say I don't really know. I don't know why people live so long. I will say that almost every culture that goes back to roughly the time that Genesis was written also believed that people lived a really, really long time, a long time ago. That's evidently something really deep within us, and we all have this belief that once upon a time, at the very beginning of all things, people lived a long time. In Sumeria, that's where we had our first writing, right? Cuneiform. In the land that's now Iraq, and later, after the Sumerians, of course, came the Babylonians and others. But Sumerians wrote down their kings. And at one point in their early list of kings that ruled Sumer and Sumeria, they have a list of 8 kings. Together, those 8 kings reigned for 241,000 years. I'm pretty sure they've stretched it a bit. It actually makes me think that these dates and these numbers of years might be pretty close to the truth. Because at least it's not 240,000 years for 8 people. For heaven's sakes, that goes on and on and on and on. And scientists among us, we can talk about the fact that, of course, the DNA had not had much chance to mutate yet, so therefore a lot of the aging processes were not. And I don't know. That's the short answer. I don't know. But people seem to believe that people used to live an awfully long time. And maybe this answers some of the questions like, where did Cain get his wife? Why was Cain afraid that people would kill him? Because over hundreds of years with other sons and daughters, there are a lot of people populating the earth. They might forget who this Cain was, and they might kill him. I don't know. I want to draw your attention again to that refrain, though. He lived this many years. He had a son. He named it this. He lived this many more years and had other sons and daughters. And then after this many years, he died. The curse, the effect of sin, of course, working itself out in the world. But also, we are seeing that people are indeed being fruitful and increasingly multiplying on the earth according to God's plan, except God's plan has had to take a different turn, as it were. Not really. God always knew what he was going to have to do to save humankind, but this is not the way that it could have been laid out. Instead, because of sin and disease and death, now we have to do things differently. Because of that, a couple of things stand out. One, this is the account. This is how it happened. And when we talk about Adam's line, and Adam's line all the way down through, notice Cain is not present. We're tracing this through Seth's line, the line of promise, the line of blessing. But where do we start? We start with God. Luke does the same thing. When Luke does his genealogy of Jesus, he worked his way all the way back finally to Adam, and then from Adam to God. First father, the progenitor, the one who brought all things into being. God is the first parent. And when God created man, Hebrew Adam or Adam, he made him in the likeness of God, in his own image. That's something that could preach many, many Sundays over. The only thing I will offer to you today is to think about what it means that every single person you bump into, family, friends, unknown to you strangers, are created in the image of God and will live forever. Worth our thought. He created them male and female, and he blessed them, and that's where we were. And then, of course, everything turned wrong. When Adam had 130 years, he had already taken from the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, hope you're following me there, and had eaten from it, and then they had been cast out from the garden. Cain had killed Abel, and now we have this other son, Seth. We go through the refrain. This many years, had the other sons and daughters, then he died, then he died, then he died, until we get to this one man, Enoch. He hadn't lived very long when he became the father of Methuselah, compared to these other guys, only 65 years. He became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, what you're listening for is he lived X number of years and had other sons and daughters, and that's not what you hear. A huge break, and it's an incredibly refreshing interlude, and it gives us hope, gives us all these thousands upon thousands of years before us. This gives us hope. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God. He didn't live this many more years. He walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. That is how things were supposed to be. And because of this, walked with God, you'll see why I picked the hymn of response that I did. Enoch walked with God 300 years. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, in the cool of the day, the Lord God himself would come and walk in the garden, and evidently Adam and Eve would walk with God, and they would have conversations, and God would teach them, and God would grow them, and they would become more and more the people they were supposed to be until that little episode with the wrong fruits that they were not supposed to eat. And then when God comes walking, they hide in the trees. And after all these generations, we have somebody who walked with God. Enoch walked with God 300 years. He didn't live 300 years. He walked with God 300 years. And that is your calling and mine, to walk with God. 300 years, had other sons and daughters. Altogether, he lived 365 years. Then you're waiting for, and then he died, and you never get it. He lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God. He repeats that. Did you not get it the first time? Enoch walked with God, and that changed everything. Everybody else before him has lived this many years, and they've lived lives that had good points, and they had lived lives that were always, always, always colored and tainted by sin. Not that Enoch was sinless, by no means, but Enoch walked with God. And then he was no more, because God took him away. Only twice in the whole history of humankind do we know that this happened. That somebody was living and did not die, but still went into the presence of God. Elijah's going to do it later. I don't know why Elijah. We get these great miracle stories with Elijah. He's super eccentric. He wears funny things. He eats funny food. And he does amazing miracles. But then he is swept up in a whirlwind. The chariot of fire roars by. He's in a whirlwind, and he goes up to heaven. He does not die. Jesus himself dies. Not Elijah and not Enoch. The fancy theological term is he was translated to heaven. I'm not sure what that means. There was one important theologian in the 1600s who thought we really should work on our Hebrew, all of us, because of course that's the language they speak in heaven. That's not the sort of translation I think he means. He is suddenly walking with God on earth, and now he is walking with God for all eternity. After 300 years on earth, for all eternity. That is good news. There is hope of heaven. Elijah got to see it too, but Enoch was the first. He did not die, but he was in heaven. There is something else. They didn't die, and that was the end of their story. They did die and then go to be in the presence of God. Some for good, some for ill. But Enoch goes straight there. Even John Calvin said, of course you know what that means is anybody who's still around when Jesus comes back, it's going to be like that. Not all will have to die, even though in Hebrews it does say we all will die. Everybody has to die once. Not everybody has to die twice. But Enoch gives us hope that God is at work doing something amazing, and we can be part of it. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him away. And then Methuselah, 969 years, and then he died. And then we finally get to Lamech. Not the bad Lamech who said, if Cain's going to be avenged 7 times, Lamech 77 times. No, this was an entirely different Lamech. Why Methuselah named him Lamech, I do not know. Lamech was not a nice guy. But he had that name. When he was 182 years old, he had a son, and he named him Noah. And we're expecting to hear that, and then he lived this many years, had other sons and daughters. We get to that. But before that, he named him Noah, which kind of sounds like the Hebrew for comfort, because he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. That's Genesis 3, the very first curse coming on the ground. And by the sweat of your brow, Adam, will you bring forth fruit from the ground. Noah is here to bring comfort in the midst of the curse. More than Lamech can possibly foresee, Noah is also going to be the one who delivers this creation and all humankind from the judgment that's coming. Noah's looking ahead to Jesus. What Noah does for his little family and for animals 2 by 2, Christ will do for all people, and, well, has opportunity to do for all people, right? He's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. He is there for the salvation of humankind. Noah looks forward to him. Okay, that's the genealogy. Noah's 500 years old when he has his first kids. 3 kids at 500 years old. Wow. I consider myself an older parent. And my best friend, whose 50th birthday we just celebrated, is about to become a father for the 3rd time. He's 50. There's a baby coming within a few weeks. He didn't ask me about that. It's not my business. But wow. Wow, I'm just hitting my mid-40s, and golly, I can't imagine starting over again. So God bless On. And anyway, that's not what we talked about at his birthday. That's not true. Some people talked about it, but not me. Okay. I have this genealogy, all this history, all these people. You know some, you don't know some. Everyone is affected by sin coming into this world. It's getting worse all the time, and that is something that's hard to fathom and hard to keep in mind. But that's the image you have to have in mind. The music is getting louder, and it's getting more foreboding, and it's more scary because sin is not diluting out into all these people. Because a few weeks ago when I was trying to think about what it's like when sin comes into the world, the image I had in my mind, which I didn't explain very well, was a few drops of ink into a big glass container of water. And the longer it goes, this ink spreads out, and eventually it goes through all the water, right? Right. However, it never completely colors the water. I mean, it taints it, but as it goes out, it gets more and more dilute, and so eventually all the water has some ink in it, but it's not really dark. I was looking for pictures this weekend of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I thought maybe this would be the thing. I didn't find anything satisfying. It's been about a year and a half. But the similarity to sin entering into the world, this drop of ink entering into the water, is that it was not just one drop and then it gradually spread, but it wasn't as bad the farther it got. It got worse the farther it got. Like the oil spill, because oil was still coming out. And so you could see the first little satellite views, and then you could see the projected views, and then you could see the other satellite views of how far it had actually gone. My parents didn't go to the Gulf Coast that year to go to the beach. They drove all the way to Georgia from Arkansas because tar balls were washing up on the shore of the island they normally go to. And at the very beginning, people were saying, well, this sometimes happens. Probably a coincidence. Has nothing to do with all those millions of gallons of oil that are spewing into the ocean a few miles away. No, sometimes tar balls wash up on the shore. That's what it's like, though. What has been happening is that the more and more people on the earth, sin is not getting less as it spreads out. It is getting stronger and more dangerous all the time. And all of creation is threatened by this. What is to become of us? So glad that we're at the hour that we are. This is the strangest, maybe one of the strangest things in Genesis, and I have almost no time to tell you about it. So the short answer is, I don't really understand, but let me remind you what's happening here. Men began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, naturally. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Who? The sons of God. Now, once upon a time, in an easier time, John Calvin's take on this is, no, sons of God. Not the way it's used in other places of the Bible to talk about, say, angels. That's ridiculous. What he really means here is the sons of God came from Seth's line, and the daughters of men came from Cain's line. And so that's the problem. The people from Seth's line were intermingling with this line that was not chosen, was not blessed. And boy, is that an easier way to look at it, and almost certainly not what's being described here. As far as we can tell, really what this means is, and again, you don't have to read much mythology, it's certainly all through Greek and Roman mythology and other mythologies as well, of gods coming down on earth and having children by women, human women. That appears to be what's being described here. I do not understand, but that's clearly what it seems to be saying.